So good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this webinar co-organized between EAMJ and KMA Research Committee. The topic today, as you know, is sustainability of research. And we'd like to thank you all for making time. We're just giving a minute or so for those who are in the queue to join in. And then we'll be starting shortly. So I'd like to request for a bit of your patience, and then we'll get started. Thank you. So thank you once again, everyone, for making time to join this webinar. I'll introduce myself. My name is Dr. Kiplangat Sige. I'm a member of the KMA Research Committee, and I will be the MC for this evening's session. We have an excellent group of presenters, and it promises to be quite a lively discussion on sustainability of research. And so before we begin, I'd like to welcome the president of Kenya Medical Association, Dr. Simon Kigondu, to make some introductory and welcome remarks. Dr. Kigondu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Without much ado, I would like to welcome all participants to this webinar. The East African Medical Journal will be celebrating 100 years at the KMA Annual Scientific Conference scheduled for the Mombasa in May. And as we gear up towards that, we want to continue having educative webinars by the research committee and in conjunction with East African Medical Journal. So my appeal is that all of you will join us in the celebrations of EAMJ and take part in some of these educative webinars that we are having for research and EAMJ. And these are all available at the KMA YouTube page, so you can become a scholar on that. Thank you very much, Gay, and hoping to get some good learning.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you also for the update about the 2023 conference in Mombasa. So looking forward to that. 100 years of EAMJ, that's quite a milestone, and promises again to be quite an event for next year. So I'll start by introducing the first presenter this evening, who is none other than Dr. Frank Wafula. Frank, as many of us actually call him, he holds a PhD in health systems policy, as well as a master's of public health and pharmacy degree. He is currently a senior lecturer in healthcare management at the Strathmore Business School, but has an extensive experience working with health systems across Africa, with the World Bank, as well as East African Community, research advisor. He has also previously lectured at the School of Economics at the University of Nairobi, and is well known in the health system space. And he will be speaking to us this evening on the future of clinical research and how we can develop socially and economically valuable solutions for healthcare. So Dr. Frank Wafula, the floor is yours. So as well as unmute and perhaps also switch on your video.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Sigay. Nice to be here. Just a couple of maybe disclaimers. So not so much clinical research. I'll be talking broadly about health research, and that includes, of course, basic clinical and health systems and public health. So, and just very few slides. It's the end of the day. I have no intention of making this a painful exit to the day. Yeah, so I'm just going to share my slides, and I think hopefully this will be more of a discussion than a one-sided conversation. I think I have been ably introduced, no question about that. The biography is a little older, but it's fairly accurate. I'm not a senior lecturer, I'm an associate professor. In academia, that's a fairly big difference again. So just putting it out there. But the other things are fairly accurate around, the kind of work and experiences that I've done. Sometimes I call myself a recovering academic for the simple reason that for the last few years, I've found myself transitioning from more formative research, which is what I used to do quite a lot in the 6 years I spent at Cambridge, to a fairly different and diverse type of research that we do at Strathmore. Strathmore is a fairly unique institution in the sense that it's a lot closer to industry and policy than perhaps where I worked before. So this is my 8th year in Strathmore. And I think over the 8 years, I've kind of moved quite a long way towards the more commercialization side of research. So that's kind of what I'll be talking about, borrowing a little bit from some evidence synthesis that was done by Elsevier and others around how they foresee healthcare, evolving over the next couple of decades. And like I said, the slides are very few. I always start, just when I talk about research, health research, I like starting with this because, it's a whole very complex ecosystem that starts from inside the cell, to the organs, which is, pharmacology, physiology, and pathology, all the way to the, whole human being, which I think is what a lot of you might be interested in. That's clinical research. And then, of course, to groups of people, that's, population health and, global health more increasingly because of globalization. But also just recognizing that these are all kind of in the back end. Beyond that, we actually talk about systems that ensure that all these good ideas that are generated within the lab are translating into improved healthcare outcomes and other health systems goals. So we talk about health systems research. We talk about health services research, which is tightly linked to clinical research because it's about how that service is provided. And then, of course, we talked about the management science, which is the management side of it. So this is how I look at health research. And in my talk, as I keep talking about this, you're going to get that kind of tone as opposed to, just focusing on clinical research alone. Because a lot of these trends are kind of generic, so they cut across health research because of the strong linkages across health research domains. Yeah, so just starting with this image of a fast-moving vehicle that gives you the impression of driver, vehicle, road, and nature in harmony. It's how perhaps we can look at ourselves with regard to our position in the research space. So you talk about that broad environment, which has very little to do with research, but directly affects the research, what we are doing and how we are shaping and thinking about research. And then you talk about the road on which you're driving. So the weather doesn't have anything to do with the car. It was never, the weather was never created with the car in mind, but the car has to be sensitive about the weather for it to drive well. We talk about the meso environment, and that's the research ecosystem. So we are getting closer home. And then you talk about the microenvironment, which is you or your institution that's operating within that mesoenvironment. And so this is how perhaps you could look at how research is being shaped. So there are certain global macro factors that are not necessarily targeting health or health research, but they do have an effect on the direction that health research takes. And then, of course, there's the research ecosystem itself and how that's changing and shaping and reshaping. And then finally, as institutions, what is it that we need to be doing to adapt, to this rapidly changing world? And so just the first of 3 slides or so is a reflection of some of the macro drivers of changes in health research. I just take about 3-4 minutes and talk about these kind of 6 factors that are interlinked. The first one is, and I think this is important, and I think we've all experienced that, what some people might think it's reduction in funding, but really it's just diverting funding towards more urgent uses, or slightly different objectives of what used to be research funding as it used to come in the past. So funds are being diverted from some of the traditional research. Some of the pots we used to apply for funding, for example, have completely dried up. Health systems research initiatives, you have a lot of UKRI funding streams, you have, USG funding streams that are completely being reshifted. So there's quite a bit of realignment and change in how funding is being delivered, particularly through bilateral partnerships and governments. But also there is actually a reduction in research, particularly the pot of money that's allocated towards low and middle income countries. So we have had reductions in funding research generally, and that basically means adjustments in what we think is important or important research questions, and trying to fit into that as well. Then, of course, we have that strong push towards having closer linkage to industry, and that also cuts across. It also emphasizes the importance of multidisciplinary research. So that again, that we're seeing quite a lot of. It's almost becoming impossible to now, moving forward, exist in a vacuum or in a pigeonhole as a clinical researcher or as a health systems researcher who's looking at child health. So there's quite a big push towards having these different types of collaborations, both within and without the health, the boundaries of health. So if you're doing research within a clinical setting, then, so this in a Wellcome Trust report, you're perhaps 3 times more likely to attract funding if you're trying to link diagnostics, imaging, or pharmacy to aspects of clinical care, which is very different from the purist type of research that used to be there in the past. So, just thinking outside the box and trying to answer other questions. But also beyond healthcare, there's more looking at all these relationships across social determinants of healthcare, looking at climate change in healthcare, looking at smart cities, urbanization, looking at education and healthcare, some of those intersectional areas, that's also becoming quite important. And I'll come back to the idea of industry-funded research, because that's something that's also coming out quite strongly. The other thing, and perhaps this was accelerated during COVID-19, again, was just the strong emphasis on research as a public good, but also narrowing that social accountability pathway. It's becoming increasingly hard to justify your existence as a researcher if what you're doing cannot be linked directly to some kind of improvement in human, economic, or social development. So you're going to see a lot of emphasis towards creating those linkages or making them clearer in places where they already existed as well. And linked to the last point I have there as well is just the whole idea around people want evidence now, and they're willing to bend rules to allow that to happen. So that long publication pathway that used to be there, I think increasingly is going to get shorter and shorter. There's an impatience around putting money in very formative research that doesn't seem to be delivering, or at least doesn't seem to have a clear linkage to industry or commercialization or policy. So again, that's something that's changing quite a bit. Yeah, technology, that can't be ignored. I think it's affected service delivery. I think if you're coming up as a health institution, you're at high risk if you're not thinking about how you're going to infuse technology, particularly what you call consumer-facing technology in what you're doing. And again, it's a trend that has been growing steadily over the last decade. Tech being the fastest growing industry in Africa, but it was accelerated during the COVID pandemic as well. So consumer-facing models of providing care, of monitoring, reporting, are basically becoming a mainstay, and the millennials are taking over now. So that's no longer going to be an option. At some point, it just might be, the only way to think about that. So that affects research as well. It affects how you capture data, how you collect data. It affects ethics around how you use the kind of information that you have as well, and some of those big questions. But also creates new opportunities, moving towards high velocity. Data and big data. We are not quite there yet, but there's a huge quantity of data that's now being collected at a much faster rate, and that basically means you need to start thinking about research that is driven by information that's there, but also ways of manipulating data in very unique ways to answer certain research questions. I talked about information being a public good, and then of course the idea that this has to come out faster as well. So my second last slide is about some of the macro, directional shifts, changing funding mix. There is reduced public funding, and this is a global phenomenon for research, but there seems to be increasing funding from more philanthropic organizations. And interestingly, these maps have actually shown industries allocating more resources towards R&D, both internally, but also looking outside their own comforts to provide research funding, towards open markets. And so this again is quite new, because when I was working in Cambridge, people used to frown upon getting, for example, money from the pharma industry to do research. There are ethical concerns about that. And that was a normal back then. But in the years to come, those could be the only guys who are funding your research. And so that also means, you need to think about, conflict of interest in a different way. And you need to think about how to frame and how to present some of these in ways. So all these models have to change. The entire ecosystem has to adapt to that as well. Of course, market dominance in research space, that's something we've seen quite a lot. There's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of talk around tech startups and entrepreneurship within the healthcare space. And that is attracting a lot of funding. Actually, the biggest pots of money that are coming into particularly Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, I think in South Africa, and increasingly Rwanda, funds that are looking at innovations in areas like agri-food, security, business, climate, and healthcare. And a lot of those actually do have a component of research and analysis. So again, what does that say about where we are going? And, are we going to lose out? Are we going to see a shift, a disruption that takes away the current ecosystem and brings something that's entirely new? And then I talked about the shortened accountability pathway. So you can't just do research for the sake of it anymore. I think it's getting harder to do that. The social benefit has to be clearer. So Elsevier, the big publisher, talked about the rise of the East and the kind of influence it's likely to have on research, and I found that quite interesting as well. So China's dominance in the global space it can't be ignored. So that's something that we're living with. There's a general interest, and the Chinese model is quite different. Part of the reason the Chinese have been very successful in penetrating our markets is they actually picked. Shall I call it a loophole or some weaknesses in the Western model, particularly when it comes to collaborating or working with the Southern partners, Africa. So in the Western model, the idea is investment, aid and investment in these markets. So aid works hand in hand with investment. And then of course they use that in a very complex way, to get certain concessions within these countries and, minerals and everything else. So what the Chinese did is they argued that you can't do investment and trade and rely on aid alone. So they actually went upstream to look at infrastructure development. And that became very appealing to a lot of African countries. So the Chinese have created this strong appetite among the Southern partners around real tangible products out of these bilateral arrangements, and that is likely to spill over into research. So you're going to see more and more research that is geared towards very short and immediate results that can actually be demonstrated, which is really the East model, the Chinese model of doing things, and less emphasis, things like democracy and some of those social, socially constructed values. You're going to see quite a bit of the emphasis around that, and of course, state-controlled research agenda. You only publish certain things that make sense. So that is, Elsevier raised that, and I found that to be quite interesting. And then finally, I talked about focus on making research faster, but also a lot of competition for the limited research funding as well, and concerns around all these multi-sectoral collaborations. What do they mean for intellectual property and data ownership? And of course, this is also happening at a time when issues of data privacy are becoming dominant. I'll talk about those in this slide. So those are very macro factors. Those are kind of global factors that directly affect research, but more to do directly with the kind of research environment and ecosystems that are there. I kind of touched on this a bit. Industry-driven research is going to be taking a bit of center stage, and that has to do with high net worth individuals working through institutions looking for specific results. You're talking about philanthropic organizations, but what we saw during COVID was also governments being willing to invest through industry as a way of accelerating research. So industries have their own research ecosystem, particularly when it comes to product innovation. And then that allows the government to purchase or own some of the products downstream at a much lower cost. So they actually sidestep the challenge of intellectual property. So that's what we don't see in Africa. Governments don't invest in research. And when good products come up, then they have to buy them at commercial rates. So that's that Western model. There is thinking that might also spill over more towards the South. But of course, we do very little product innovation in this part of the world. Yes, so this is going to affect the kind of methodologies we have, which were very formative, biomedical research-driven models. I talked about expansion of technology and potential role for big data, driving things like AI and, basically machine learning. And, so that strong reliance on data might also change how research is done. And some of the things that at the moment are relying on physical intervention or creation through research efforts might actually just be things that are done through machine learning. And some of those results could just be coming out automatically. So that's going to be quite important. And the last bullet in that second point about Africans' prominence as an innovation sandbox, that's an interesting one because Africa seems to be the last place that's playing this role of providing an innovation sandbox where everybody is it's pretty much open, and a lot of innovations that cannot be tested in the West are actually tested here to be scaled in the West, partly because the markets in the West are very competitive, and testing a new idea in a very competitive market, if it goes bad, then you can be crowded out of the market. So a lot of big boys from the North prefer testing some of the ideas in the South and then trying to scale them through their markets. So that creates an opportunity for Africa to benefit, to latch onto that, particularly from a research learning and a perspective as well. And all that comes partly because, unlike the West, where regulation comes before innovation, we still have a lot of regulatory loopholes. So there's an opportunity to test a lot of ideas within kind of a natural sandbox before regulation catches up. And then, of course, last but not least, I talked about focus on commercially beneficial research as well. Just in the limited role of formative research, except within very limited, perhaps biomedical, molecular biology, basic sciences, where the role remains very clear. But outside here, I think you're going to see more and more attempts to link research, technology, innovation, and commercialization, which is what's happening. And I think as more research ideas come up and people develop more research agendas, you're more likely to see the blue ocean rather than the red ocean strategy. That basically means to attract funding, you'll have to create new research markets rather than competing over old ideas and having incremental adjustments to some of the ideas that have already been researched on. So in summary, things are a bit tight, and it's not business as usual. It is actually business unusual. And I think that basically means anybody who's interested in research will now need to perhaps be more forward-looking around how this macro meso environment is changing to better adapt. Thank you. Back to studio.
Thank you so much, Dr. Afula, for that excellent talk, giving us a big picture view of the current changes in the research space. Very excellent way to introduce today's session. I'll apologize for the substandard introduction earlier. Now I can refer to you as Prof. Wafula, I think, from now henceforth. Really appreciate. To the audience, as I mentioned, please put your questions in the Q&A at the bottom. However, Dr. Afula has to leave for another engagement, so we'll break a bit of the protocol to allow 1 or 2 questions at this point for Dr. Afula. And I believe there was already one that was spotted in the chat box. Let me quickly go to it. The question coming from Beatrice Kariuki was, where would you map operational and implementation research? So maybe Dr. Afula, you could take that one first.
Yeah, that's a good question. So implementation science is a fairly broad term that's used to basically refer to forms of research that are embedded within practice or real life, real life activities, what you're doing. So they don't necessarily fit into a single small box, but I would actually think they play somewhere around clinical research, public health, going all the way to health systems and, health services research. So depending on, because it is possible to do an operational research project as part of a clinical, research undertaking, where it's embedded within the clinical practice. But at the same time, it's possible to do it, within a public, health setting or population health as well. So I would say that's a slightly different way of classifying it, and it doesn't necessarily fall into the typology I was trying to refer to.
Okay, thank you so much, Doc. Really appreciate. I think that was probably the only question at this point. Of course, if there are any other questions for Dr. Afula, you can still send them and we'll give it to him later on for him to respond directly to you. And I really appreciate the last point where you talked about business unusual. Indeed, things are changing and some of these research concepts are actually also overlapping. So thank you so much, Dr. Afula, for your time, and really appreciate your insights for this talk. I think, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
So I mean, feel free to email me. I think I'm easy to reach. And thank you very much, for the audience as well. And have a good evening, all of you.
Okay.
Allow me to drop off. Yeah, thank you.
No problem. No problem, Dr. Asante Sana. Really appreciate. So I think at this point, we'll go straight to the next and final presenter. This will be Dr. Elizabeth Kemigisha from APHRC. A little bit about her. She holds a PhD in public health from Belgium, as well as a Master of Medicine degree in pediatrics and child health, as well as a medical degree from Barara University of Science and Technology in Uganda. She's currently project manager overseeing implementation of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation funded project aimed at evaluating the long-term impact of PEPFAR's DREAMS interventions among adolescent girls and women in Nairobi's informal settlements. I'll also allow her to add or correct any other issue around the bio as she takes the stage at this point. So Dr. Kemigisha, without further ado, the stage is yours. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be your presenter tonight for the second time in a single year. So I'm really pleased to represent FHRC. I don't have any edit to my introduction. Maybe to add that most of my practice and experience is from Uganda. I've only been in Kenya for this year. So some of the examples and experiences may not be familiar with the context, but we are all East African and probably face the same challenges. So mine is really a simplified format of what Professor has just presented. And I hope you can hear me and see my slides. Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
All good. Yes.
All right.
And
Okay.
the slides are good. Thank you.
So I'll really take you through very few issues around innovations in clinical research. We'll discuss a little bit about the rationale building on what Professor Wafula has mentioned. Hierarchy of evidence and why it's important, the role of mixed methods designs. They're topically broad, and I'll try to keep it simple for the time has been given to us. So I have some quotes when I was thinking of the rationale. I picked a few quotes from here and there. The first one is from the chairperson.
Sorry, Dr. Kemigisha, can you hear me?
Yes, please. Can you hear me?
Hello? Yeah, sorry, I think, yes, you can hear you, but unfortunately the audio seems to be dropping a little bit, so maybe we could have the video off for now, if that's okay for you.
Is it clear now?
Thank you very much.
Can you hear me?
Yes, it's clear. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
No problem. Yeah.
So, yeah, we are going through the quotes. Patients with unmet needs are longing for innovative treatments to be approved, and especially those with rare diseases. We saw this especially during this epidemic, and currently in Uganda, we are facing the challenge of Ebola with a different strain from one which has the vaccine. So we really have people with needs, and they need speed up of research and new opportunities such that they can access innovative drugs. So that's also one area for innovation. And we know how the first innovation for the Ebola vaccine saved thousands of the West Africans who were affected with the epidemic some years back. Then also Professor emphasized this, that COVID has resulted in long-term effects on science and research. The way in which we carry out research has had to rapidly adapt as a result of pressure placed on scientists. We had to have vaccines, some of them at phase 2 of clinical trial, just because of the need to have innovative treatments for the COVID epidemic. So there's a lot of pressure on scientists to come up with innovative approaches to ensure that we answer our emerging problems. Then innovations focus on large-scale transformation initiatives that are cross-functional and tied specific outcomes. In the field of clinical research, which is driven by data, constrained by time, not only time and also costs, and compared to regulatory compliance, new initiatives could bring vast improvements. So when I was reflecting on the need for innovations, I was thinking what the participants or potential patients expect from us, and also to respond to the business unusual in terms of emerging and re-emerging epidemics, and ensuring that we are committed to deliver on time adapt and make sure that we stick to the regulatory needs of these clinical trials. So all of these are areas for innovations, as we'll continue to find out in the presentation. So when we think of research, we are a mixed audience. We can think of research in terms of hierarchy, starting from the non-human research in animals and laboratories. And then we can have case reports and case series, then case control studies, cohort studies, even cross-sectional studies may come here. And then the evidence, the higher you go, the more evidence or reliable scientific evidence we generate. The gold standard being the randomized clinical trials, but we have more qualification for this by having systematic reviews of clinical trials as well as meta-analysis. And the tip being able to transform all this and come up with clinical practice guidelines that are evidence-informed. As you can see, for most of the research we do may be at different levels, but there is increasing need that we go higher such that we can create evidence that will inform our clinical practice. So looking at randomized clinical trials in particular, they follow a simple design. You have a defined population. Some will be assigned to a treatment arm and the other a placebo, but increasingly, the regulation has been enforcing the need to get rid of placebos and at least assign standard of care. And then we track outcomes, whether they have improved or not. And also just for a recap, they are in different phases. The phase 1 to test for safety in humans after the laboratory experiments, and phase 2, which has about 100 participants or less to test whether this new drug that's being introduced works or not. That's the efficacy. And then phase 3 will be comparing the new treatment with the standard treatment, and the sample size may increase. And phase 4 may be conducted in a non-clinical trial setting, but for long-term surveillance and post-marketing safety and efficacy. And this can involve as many people as thousands. So these are the basic designs, and much as they look simple, they are a bit complicated to fulfill, especially the rigor that is needed to ensure that a clinical trial goes through these phases and we are able to get a new drug or vaccine approved. So when we look at the different trials, clinical trials that we can design, we can have some for treatment, where we test new approaches to a disease. They can relate to prevention, what approaches can prevent a certain disease, or early detection or screening, or diagnostic trials. And the nature or design of trials, there are several. I couldn't put the full list, but for a recap, you can always go and find out what design is suitable for the kind of study you want to write. But my emphasis here is on the common challenges. And that's where I thought innovation would come in. Because before we innovate, we need to think, is there a problem? Before there was sliced bread, there was a problem with sharing the bread that was unsliced. So if there is no problem with the current way of doing things, then probably we don't need to innovate, okay? So it's very important that we recognize the current challenges we face in conducting research. And some of these challenges that we face while conducting research, we have challenges in patient recruitment. We know that in COVID, the face-to-face recruitment became very difficult. we had to innovate and start telephone-based interviews and remote ways of recruitment, including online or social media, to get to the participants. Sometimes the participants of interest may remain hidden. And in fact, as Professor said, there would be, because of the nature of the trial design, sometimes there is underrepresentation of the vulnerable groups or those in less developed countries because of this challenge of recruitment. Once we have recruited the patients, we need to follow up to see whether they experience certain outcomes. And the biggest challenge we have is patient or participant retention. Loss of follow-up affects achievement of the sample size and will indeed affect the power, and we may not be able to interpret our findings with confidence. So what are the innovations around retention of participants? For instance, right now we are conducting a quasi-experimental study among the participants in informal settlements of Nairobi. This is a closed cohort that has been followed up for the 6th year in the row. And we have realized most of them have moved on with their lives and have moved to different parts of Kenya, East Africa. Some even, they have gone away from Africa. So that's the challenge. If you're following an outcome over a long time, the patient is not there to wait for you to achieve the outcomes of the study. So we need innovations. How can we adequately identify the patient, the participant we have enrolled to make sure that we don't get lost to follow-up? We definitely have to comply with several rules and regulations. For instance, issues around consent and ensuring that the participants who experience any adverse events are adequately followed up. This is very complex and difficult, especially if you are doing telehealth or virtual enrollment. We have had difficulties in dealing with participants who are interviewed on phone. They might be in a setting where they cannot disclose their personal information because their surroundings are with other people, you know. So while innovation is good, but we also interface challenges, especially in trying to ensure that we are complying with our ethical regulations. The other challenge is to manage multiple sites. It's almost difficult to have a trial in one place. So sometimes you have 2 sites and you have to standardize the operation procedures. And that comes with a lot of commitment and training for staff. And it becomes a bit complex to make sure that you can simulate everything in one trial site in another. So that means that we would have patients locally recruited from areas that are close to very big laboratories or research centers. And then those who are very far off may not benefit because of the issue of having multiple sites. I also talked about the human resource, retaining high quality resource for this kind of data collection, the costs. You do a budget today, you say you recruit people in 2 months, you can't find them at the 8th month, you're maintaining your staff, you know, you double your expense. Where do you get this money from? So it's very difficult to conduct such studies, especially if you cannot predict all the costs and the changing prices here and there. Professor talked about technology. It has become very important, especially for funding, to ensure that technology enhanced research is available out there. But as researchers from developed countries, we face challenges with identifying the right technology, okay, to apply that will be easily adaptable in our context, and that the patients will adapt well, the participants will adapt well to this kind of technology. I can give an example. We had a trial on HIV adherence, and we're using what they call the WISE pill device that is connected to the cup where the medicine is stored. And every time the patient, the participant would open to take a tablet, then the investigator would get a notice that they are trying to take their ARVs. But of course, the device had a certain sound it would make, and most of the patients just left the bottle open, you know. They were not comfortable with that tracking, or they would make sure that they put something else that could mute the noise. So there are many things out there, but these could be also areas for innovation to make sure that we are able to comply and collect data suitably. So away from clinical trials or quasi-experimental studies, we have another form of research, and I'm introducing it with this quote, that not everything that counts, that can be counted, counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. I want to throw it back to the audience. Can someone volunteer and tell us what this could be all about in terms of research? Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. A volunteer, please. I don't know if they're able to unmute or only chatting. If you can't talk, it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can have some comments in the chat. Anyone wants to volunteer? Can see a comment already. Sensitivity versus specificity. Is that what Einstein was referring to, Dr. Kemigisha?
Well, not there yet. There's something about counting.
Counting, yeah. I think somebody has also put qualitative in the chat, so that could be in the direction. Dr. Kigondo, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, I think there's someone who might have gotten it here.
Okay.
George, yeah.
All right. Let me see the chat. Necessary data to capture and captured data. Well, yeah, you're almost there. But it refers to the other branch. We have competing research strength. Some people think qualitative research is not valid, and quantitative research is superior to qualitative research, okay? But
Yeah.
we are coming to learn from this quote that not everything that can be counted, that is quantitative counts, you know? You can have all these numbers, so many people are dying, you know? But still, you may want to know the story that not everything that counts need to be interpreted in numbers, okay? So it's just an understanding that there is equal value in quantitative and qualitative. I was trained as a quantitative researcher, and I was very happy in that area until I was introduced to qualitative research. Now identify because there's I'm not saying that it's for everyone, but you should develop an interest to know how to explain or try to interpret our findings that come from the quantitative research. Because from the hierarchy of the evidence, you could see really that qualitative is not featuring. But one of the innovations we are seeing is in the area of mixed methodology. Most of the funders are really intrigued and attracted to a mixed methods design to answer a particular problem. So here in mixed methods, we collect and analyze data by mixing both quantitative and qualitative research in a single study to understand the research problem. And here I'll really be brief because of time. So there are certain characteristics for mixed method research. One is priority. So for some studies, you find there's equal weight for the quality and quantity, and other studies either carries less weight or more weight, okay? And then the sequence the
Sorry again. Sorry, Dr. Kemigisha.
First, and then quality to answer it qualitative data mixed. Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, the audio was quite bad a few seconds ago, but I think the slides are helping. So a lot previous, maybe 2 slides were not very clear, but I think those in the audience who could read, yeah, but it's okay. I think we can probably just try to wind up and
yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, because of the weather, I have a bad network, but this is really my second last slide. And I was trying to show the differences in the mixed methods design, the quality and quantity data collection, and then you interpret it at the same time. And then the explanatory design, where you collect the quantitative and later the qualitative, and then interpret based on how the results were emerging. And then exploratory, you start with for the qualitative and from the theory and the themative data, and then the embedded are gaining a lot of attention. So in conclusion, if you can still hear me, we need to be aware of the trends and innovations, and you need to establish and be confident in your own research niche, but also be aware that innovative approaches are not only attractive to the research world, but also to the funders. And thank you for your attention. I'm sorry about the internet challenge. I hope you could hear. So I thank you, and greetings from FHRC. And this is the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kemigisha. Sorry about the network issues on your end. I think the slides were quite useful, very self-explanatory. And thanks also for introducing that interesting question. I think even there was another comment from Dr. Kigondo about you do not have to do a test on everything, which I think is it's a good point. And you know, the issue of data, what we capture sometimes is not necessary, and what we miss out is necessary. So thank you so much for that excellent talk, and really being a member of this research webinar. As you mentioned, your second webinar actually. At this point, I'd like to invite Dr. Abdi Greek from the KMA Research Committee to facilitate the Q&A session. I think we have 1 or 2 questions here and there, and maybe we can take it up, and then after that, move to the next part of the program. Dr. Greek.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sigei, for this opportunity to moderate the Q&A. As you can see, we have very short time. We have almost run out of time, so I'll take 2 questions for the speakers. The first question is from Professor Mwanda. who says, kindly tweak research with the role of KMA. This is likely a KMA question, so I will hand over to Dr. Chafatso to answer that.
Well, thanks, Dr. Greek, and thanks, Professor Mwanda, for the question. The role of KMA, I mean, we are not really a research institute per se, but we are doing a lot together with the support of the National Executive Committee, of course, with the East African Medical Journal Board, to try and make both research both accessible and easy to do, rather facilitating some of the initiatives we are doing. Just starting with this webinar, we normally say no research is complete until it is published. And we have Professor Okeyo on the line, who I might just also invite to make a comment there. So we want to make sure that research that is done can easily find a home. And we are very lucky with the East African Medical Journal being managed from KMA. The other thing I think that's important is research needs generally approval, especially clinical research or preclinical as well. And one of the things that NEC is very keen on doing is supporting the process of increasing the review capacity within the country. And as such, I think KMA, together with partners in APHRC and other like-minded partners, trying to set up additional ethics review capacity within the country. The other important thing about research, I think, from the two speakers, is that we can no longer continue doing research in silos. First of all, the funding pot is shrinking. And we need to think innovative ways of doing research. And one of the things that KMA I think is very well placed to do is bring different professional associations, you know, the obstetricians, COGS, the SSKs, sort of form a link and create a platform where just getting research conversation going. We are thinking of starting workshops to, you know, provide more technical, beyond just the webinars, more technical training and capacity building in things like statistics. And also we as KMA, I don't know if Prof. Okeyo, there's something to add, or Dr. Kigondo, I might be missing out, but you're welcome to help me with that as well. Alice, I see your hand is up here.
Thank you, Dr. Chafatso.
Yeah.
I want to say two comments in regards to the discussion that has proceeded. First of all, I want to thank the speakers for very illuminating presentations. I'm in an outside environment with a lot of noise, so I don't know if that statement is clear. Then I can go to my 2 points.
Yes, we can hear you, Prof.
Yeah, number one is the vision of Kenya Medical Association is one, the welfare of its members, and two, the provision of quality healthcare. Now, you need research to generate evidence to inform actions that result in quality of healthcare. So the link between Kenya Medical Association and research, this is responding to Professor Mwanda's question. It's very clear in my head, and I hope I can convince others that indeed KMA is appropriately placed to facilitate and to disseminate and to do anything that involves research. The other point is related to the presentation, where there was the question about what counts may not necessarily be counted, and what is counted does not necessarily count. By the time we reach a point where we are saying something counts, we are saying because it is something which makes us feel that it counts. And there is a way feeling is qualitative, but there is a way you can convert qualitative attribute into a way that it can be objectively counted. And so it is just a question of how we design a research to make our qualitative attributes countable in a way that is accountable. So there is, for me, there is no contradiction. And it is indeed unfortunate that in this present day and era, we can still say that qualitative research is inferior to quantitative research. Because I also started from there where I thought quantitative is king and qualitative is not. But as I have grown in the profession, I've come to realize the very important aspect that qualitative research does in generating evidence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chafaso and Professor Wanda. I can see Dr. Alice has raised her hand. The floor is yours, Dr. Alice. You can ask your live question.
Thank you. It's actually not a question. Prof. Okeo has spoken to what I had in mind. I think what Prof. Mwanda is looking for is a direct line between KMA and research. And I think I've had Prof. Okeo volunteering to give a webinar to say exactly how KMA is related to research directly, so that a member can know exactly what it is as a member of KMA, and KMA collectively contributes towards research. So I think that is what Prof. Mwanda had in mind. Yeah, that is, and Prof. Okeo has already touched on it. So I think that is something that can be done in one of the webinars coming up.
Thank you very much, Alice. And the next question is from anonymous attendee who is directly addressing to Dr. Kemengisha. Could you say something about the real world evidence? The term is all over these days. Over to Dr. Kemengisha.
What's the question again?
The question is from an anonymous attendee, is asking for, could you say something about the real
world evidence?
Okay. The term is all over these days, everywhere.
Yeah, so the
Sorry, Doctor, your audio is a bit unaudible. Dr. Kemengisha, can you hear me?
I'm not sure that I can answer this appropriately.
Yes.
I don't know if you meant the quality of evidence or evidence that would be taken up. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
I said the question is not clear. Real world evidence. You mean evidence that is globally acceptable?
That's, I think, what you mean.
Yes, evidence varies depending on the quality of research that has on the rigor. Yeah, the rigor for any flaws, and it should be convincing and also generalizable, done in different contexts. That's why we're up in arms that Africans, we are not well represented in the COVID trials, vaccine trials. So when we talk about the quality of evidence, it depends on the rigor and the time.
Dr. Kemengisha, you are again off. We cannot hear you.
Of research that has been done and whether it can be
Dr. Kemengisha, you are
different
out.
contexts. So maybe some might work. I'll try to type in the chat. Okay. I'm so sorry. I was going to type the response in the chat. I was saying globally accepted and the rigor and the quality of study that has been done. I was going to type what I mentioned in the chat.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Kemengisha. Dr. Chafaso, can you comment on what Dr. Alice about tweaking the KMA and with Professor.
Yeah, and I see it's also related to what Biketi is asking about how is KMA positioned in tapping into the wealth of data. I think that the bottom line is to do good research. We need resources, and resources is not just money. Resources is also people who are well trained and understand the whole process. And part of doing these webinars is trying to get people interested in these research activities. As Prof. Okeo had mentioned, and I'll just throw this back to him again, we trying to the different methods or different strategies to first of all raise awareness of research, create a critical mass of people who are interested, and then we also have to start thinking inwardly. We can't always be looking outwards for funding of research from the Gates Foundation and such places. We have to start thinking, how can we get funding for research within our own setting? How can our industries support research? We can't just be consumers of research. There's a quote that says, everyone wants to eat, but very few people are willing to hunt. There's no straight answer to this, and it's a question that needs continuous input from I think the whole lot of us. It sounds like I'm preaching to those who are converted, because the fact that you're here already shows that you're interested in research discourse. Prof. Okeo, can I pass the harder bits of the question to you?
Yes, Dr. Chafaso, and I will start with my own before I respond to this one. And what I wanted to say is that KMA, through the East African Medical Journal, has provided a mechanism for communicating evidence, and that is as per our mandate. But thinking for posterity, we went ahead and thought that, okay, other than just being a shop for products to pass through, we can also make that product. We can be co-producers of that product. And that informs the strategy, which is now 2-3 years down the line, of going into mainline research undertaking. And I think it is still in the cooking pot, led by Dr. Chafaso. So that's my comment, additional comments regarding the KMA research nexus as a providing channel for communicating evidence, and 2, being co-producers of that evidence. Now, regarding real-world evidence can be, there is an international consensus on definition of evidence. And through that definition, we come to a point where we can say, this evidence is weak, this evidence is moderate, and this evidence is strong. And there are agreed definitions of attributes of that categorization. And it is linked to the rigor of how the research is undertaken. And again, the attributes of a rigorous study are also well known and understood globally by consensus. And there is research which has a strong, rigorous design, and others have a relatively weaker, rigorous design. And therefore, generating weak, moderate, and strong evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Okeo, and thanks for the active participation of everybody. We still have got few more questions coming through, but because of time, we may not accommodate all of them. here, but they'll be shared with the speakers, panelists, and response channel through KMA Research Committee, EAMJ board. I will now thank everybody and hand over the mic to Dr. Sigei.
Thank you very much, Dr. Greek, for that session. Of course, because of time, we'll quickly go to the last session, where we'll invite the KMA Secretary General, Dr. Diana Marion, to give us some closing remarks. Dr. Karibu.
So, good evening, everyone. I want to take this opportunity to really thank, on behalf of KMA, the speakers, for having done a very good job, researched and well communicated. I want to also thank the research committee for keeping this going in collaboration also with the EAMJ. I want to thank the team that has made this webinar possible. I want to thank the attendees. And with that, I wish you a good evening until the next time we meet again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tari. Really appreciate your final words. And again, because of time, we apologize, first of all, for any connection issues that were there. KMA normally has all the webinars on the YouTube channel for KMA. So for those of you who missed bits and pieces, feel free to go to that channel within a couple of weeks once it's uploaded. For CPD points, I saw that as a question, and at this point, it would be good to clarify that those who are registered under KMPDC, you'll receive your CPD points through the email you registered for this webinar. So whatever email you used, that's where you'll find it. And of course, make sure you look out for it, including in the spam or junk folders, because sometimes it might go there, but the CPD points will definitely be sent to you. And then lastly, just to thank every one of you for availing your time for this webinar. Thank you so much for your active participation. This is the second last webinar for EAMJ KMA Research Committee for 2022. So look out for the final webinar early in December, just before we close for the Christmas break. And we look forward to seeing you also in other KMA and EAMJ initiatives. Look out for all that through the various social media and email channels for KMA. So with that, I think we've come to the end of this excellent session. Asanteni sana, and wishing you all a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.